All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 8 of PRAGATII test booster sessions by Admizz. I'm your tutor, the same one as the last one. And without any further ado, we'll be starting this session as soon as possible. So we've got around 22 participants here. I'm expecting more people to join in, so they'll be joining in once we resume the session as a whole. All right. So in this session, we are going to discuss on quantitative aptitude, which includes mathematical topics such as ratio, proportions, time, speed, work time, interest, algebra, averages, and things of that sort. We have already completed verbal reasoning and logical reasoning, right? So the last category that we have left is quantitative aptitude. And we'll be discussing that over the course of next 4 to 5 days. All right, so with that said, without any further ado, let's start with the first topic of today's discussion, which is ratios and proportions. All right. Now, as a small caveat, including the introduction and the questions, there are quite a few questions, practice questions that I've included from various resources, and you guys can feel free to try them out on your own and text the answer through the chat box. I'll be verifying if they are correct or not, and then I'll be walking you guys through the entire process of getting the answer in a step-by-step fashion. All right, so don't hesitate to engage the answers in the chat box. So with that said, let's start with ratios and proportions. But before that, as a small heads up, is my screen visible to everyone? And am I clearly audible? All right, perfect. So let's start with ratios and proportions. A ratio in its most basic form is a way to compare two quantities by using division, right? For instance, when we write miles per hour, which is a unit of speed, we write mph, or in other terms, miles, right, by hour, right? And this one is a ratio, right? Ratio. Now, there are various ways of expressing ratios, but 3 are most commonly used, right? One is the verbose form, which we plainly write in English, x to y, right? So 2 is the word that denotes a ratio. Whenever you see 2 in some problems, including numbers, you have to understand that that is sort of including ratio, but you have to read the entire context as well, right? Next up, we've got colon. Colon is a replacement of 2. So this is x to y, or some people like to call it x is to y, right? So colon represents ratios as well. And lastly, we've got the division symbol, which is simply a plain horizontal dash over the numbers, right? So x over y is a ratio as well, right? Now, next up, we've got proportions, right? So proportions is an equation, right, which is simply used to say that two ratios are equivalent, right? Now, while we're at it, I also want to point out the difference between equivalence and equality, right? So for instance, take a look at 1 over 2, right? And 8 over 16, right? These two ratios are equivalent, right? They are not equal, right? For them to be equal, the numbers in the numerator and the denominator should be the same. But in this case, the numbers are quite different, but the ratio in its totality is the same, right? Because 8 times 1 is 8 and 8 times 2 is 16. So it boils down to 1 over 2, right? So 1 over 2 and 8 over 16 are equivalent ratios. And this equation is called a proportion, right? Now, proportions are used to find unknown quantities in ratios, right? So that's basically their function as a whole. So with that said, with a brief introduction, now we'll be diving into practice problems. As I mentioned before, you guys are free to try them out on your own. In fact, you are encouraged to try them out on your own and send the answers through the chat box, right? So with that said, let's move to some practice problems. First problem. All right, I'll be waiting for a few seconds for students to try this out. And then we'll be revealing the answers. I'm getting a few answers in the chat box. Most are saying that the answer is E, right? And the answer is in fact option number E, right? But why is that the case, right? So what we have to find in this question is the share of E, right? Rupees 8,400 is divided among 4 people, A, B, C, D, in such a way that the shares of A and B, B and C and D are in the ratios of 2:3, 4:5, and 6:7. And we have to find the share of A. So first, let us start. Take a look at these two numbers, right? They're incredibly huge to be the share of a single person. So from that logic, we can directly eliminate these two, right? 84, because the total amount is 8,400 and it's divided among some people. So that implies that 8,400 is definitely not the answer, right? 8210 is also not the answer because take a look at these ratios, right? They are incredibly huge, right? And so if 8,200 were to be the answer, then these ratios had to be something like 32:1 or things of that nature, right? So these two options can be safely eliminated. Now we'll be taking a look at the other two options, 1280 and 1320. Let's start with 1280, right? Assuming that the share of A is 1280, we know that the ratio of share of A and share of B is 2:3. So we can write it as 1280, which is the share of A, over share of B, which is B, equals to 2/3, right? So from this, we can find the share of B, right? Which is 3/2 times 1280, right? Which is 640 times 3, which happens to be 1920, right? 640 times 3, which is 1920. So this is the share of B. Now we know that the share of B and C is in the ratio of 4:5. And we know what the share of B is. So with this, we can also find the share of C, which happens to be a certain number, right? And lastly, after knowing share of C, we can find the share of D as well. And once we've found out all the shares, right, A, B, C, and D, we add them up and we check, right? So A plus B plus C plus D equals to, if the sum happens to be 8400, right, then this is the correct answer. And when you use 1280 as a share of A, the sum does happen to be 8400, so it's the correct answer, right? But in some cases, it may not come, and in those cases, you have to check the other option as well. So this question, I did not use any arduous mathematical formulas to sort of calculate this, right? I safely eliminated two options simply by looking at their magnitude. And then I checked for the rest two. But in cases where all four options are small, like let's say on the range of 1200 or 1000 or like comparatively small, then in those cases you would have to make equations and then solve them in that way, right? So what can be done is you can do A over B equals 2 by 3, right? So you can do B is equal to 3 by 2A, right? And now using this quantity, 3 by 2A, what you can do is, let me use a different color just so that it's distinct. I'll be doing it somewhere around here. What you can do is you can do C is equal to, since the ratio of B and C is 4 by 5, what you can do is 5 by 4, C equals 5 by 4 times B, right? And we know that B is equal to 3 by 2A. So this is 15 by 8B. 15 by 8E, sorry, because we have transformed B in the terms of A. And so once all the ratios are found in terms of A, you can simply add them up and then equal them to 8400. And then at the end, you will get a certain answer. But this process is really long. And so in most cases, I recommend you guys to sort of eliminate out options and then proceed accordingly, right? Is that clear to everyone? All right, so with that done, we'll be moving on to the other problem. I'll be waiting for a few seconds for you guys to sort of engage, and then all right, so let's quickly walk through this problem. In a library, the ratio of number of books, story books, to that of non-story books was 4:3. So let S be the story books and N be the non-story books, right? So S over N is equal to 4/3, right? The total number of story books was 1248, right? So we can rewrite this ratio as 1248 over N, right? So with that said, what we can do is we can find the value of N as well from this entire equation, right? What we can do is N is equal to 3 by 4 times 12 1248, right? So this, from this, we can easily find the value of n as well. Next up, what we are given is when some more storybooks were bought, the ratio became 5:3, right? So what that means is let M be the new storybooks that were bought, right? Be the new books, then what we can say is S plus M, right? Because storybooks were bought by N is equal to 5/3, right? And we know the value of S and N in this case, which is the value of S is 1248, right? Plus, and we've got M, right? Which is the value that we had to find out. And we know that the value of N is 936, right? This is received after computing this particular thing, which we had calculated earlier. Now, with this said, we can simply cross multiply this particular ratio and this particular ratio and find out the answer, right? So the answer in this case turns out to be 312, right? You simply compute this, right? Cross multiply these two ratios and then find out the answer. Now, some of you are saying that the answer is option number D, which is 1560, but that's not the case. Because 1248, I mean, take a look at it this way as well, right? We've got 1248 as the total number of storybooks. And when we add some books, the ratio becomes 5:3 from 4:3. So there's not much increase in that amount, right? When you simply double the amount, that is to say, when you say that the number of books bought, new books bought is 1560, then the ratio sort of has to increase further. It should have been something like 10:3 or something, right? So 1560 is definitely not the correct answer in this case. It's 312. Was this clear to everyone? I mean, it was pretty basic, this one. All right. So with that said, let's move on to the third problem. We've got Ajay and Raz together have rupees 1050. On taking rupees 150 from Ajay, Ajay will have the same amount as what Raj did earlier. All right, so let's make equations. All right. So let the amount that Ajay had be rupees A, right? A. And let the amount that Raj had be rupees R. So we've got A plus R is equal to 1050, right? And also what we've got is when 150 is taken from Ajay, Ajay will have the same amount as what Raj said earlier, which is A minus 150. So we are taking 150 from Ajay. And this amount will be equal to what Raj had earlier, which is R, right? So this can be further written as A minus R equals to 150, right? So we've got two equations, right? This one and this one. So with these two equations, what we can do is we can solve them to find the value of A. So when you add these two equations up, 2A becomes 1200, right? So from this, we can find A is equal to 600. And then we also get that R is equal to 600 minus 150 from this equation, which is basically 450, right? So the ratio of E is to R, which we have to find out, is 600 by 450, yeah, which is equal to 15 times 4 or 150 times 4 is 600, and 150 times 3 is 450, so it's 4/3. So option number D is the correct answer, right? Yep, most of you got this correct in the chat box as well. So with this done, let's move on to the fourth question. This might be a bit challenging for you guys if you guys are a bit confused in ratios concepts. Take a look at this, right? The ratio of market prices of wheat and paddy is 2:3, and the ratio of quantities consumed in a family is 5:4. Find the ratio of expenditure on wheat and paddy. So, price of wheat, right, by price of paddy is equal to 2/3, right? Let this be the first equation. We also have got quantity. I'll write that as Q of wheat, right? And Q of paddy is equal to 5/4, which will be equation number 2. Now take a look at this, right? The expenditure or the amount of money that the family spends on wheat and paddy is basically equal to the price times the quantity, right? Expenditure is equal to price per unit, right? Times quantity used, right? And take a look at these two equations, right? We've got price of wheat by price of paddy, which is unit price, and quantity of wheat by quantity of paddy, right? So if we multiply these two equations, right, we'll get the desired ratio. So let us multiply those. 2/3 times 5/4, which is 5/6, right? When you multiply those two. And that is our answer, option number B. Was this clear to everyone? Yes, it's definitely a bit confusing, but once you remember this formula, which is expenditure equals price times quantity, right? I think it becomes quite intuitive because numerator and numerator get multiplied, right? and denominator get multiplied. So in the end, we get expenditure of wheat by expenditure on paddy in the left-hand side, and the right-hand side becomes multiplication of these two ratios, which is 5/6, which is our answer in this case, right? Next up, we've got question number 5. The three numbers are in the ratio 1:2, 2:3, and 3:4. And there's a small concept that you guys have to remember in these types of questions, right? And that is the concept of common factor, right? So in this case, if I assume that k is the common factor, k is the common factor, for these numbers, for these ratios, right? Then what I can do is I can write first number is equal to k times 1/2, which is k by 2, right? So the purpose of common factor is to basically change this ratio into numeric form. That is to say, change this ratio into the numbers that we are seeking, right? And this is a concept you'll see widely used in ratios as a whole, right? So keep in mind these things. And second number, right? Second number becomes k times the second ratio, which is 2/3, which is 2k by 3. And the third number becomes 3k by 4, right? I'm doing this directly. Now, what we are also given is that the ratio of the between the greatest and the smallest number is 36, right? So judging by this particular ratio, we know that 3:4 is definitely greater than 2:3, which is definitely greater than 1:2. So 3:4 must be the ratio of the greatest number, right? So with that said, what we'll do is solve for their difference, right? Which is given in the problem, 3k by 4 minus, and the smallest one is 1/2, which is k by 2, right? Is equal to 36, right? So subtracting these, what we'll get is k by 4, right? Let me do a small partition here. K by 4, and this is a follow-up of this. K by 4 is equal to 36, right? And from this, we can find k is equal to 120 plus 6 times 4, which is 24, right? So it is 144. Now, after we've found out k, all we need to do is find the rest of numbers. So the first number is, let me change the pen's color, right? T4 over 2, which is 72, right? And the second number is 2k by 3, which is 2 times 144 by 3, right? Which happens to be 2 times 144 by 3 happens to be 84, right? And then lastly, we've got 3k over 4, which happens to be 108. So the correct answer is option number A. Was this clear to everyone? In this problem, one of the most confusing things might be the concept of common factor, right? But common factors are quite easy to recognize, right? Just a second, the chat is saying that the correct answer is option number D. So there might have been an error in computation. So just let me check that. Yep, the correct answer is in fact D. I made a mistake in this particular computation, second number one. So A is not the correct answer. The correct answer is D. The second number should be 96. Yep, absolutely. This should be 96. All right. Thank you guys for that correction. With that said, let's move on to, this is incorrect as well. The correct answer is D. Question number 6. If A is to B equals 2 is to 3, B is to C equals 4 is to 5, and C is to D equals 6 is to 7, then what is the value of this ratio? Yep, I'm getting a few engagements in the chat. Some are saying that the correct answer is C, others are saying that it's D. Yep, I'm getting someone saying B as well. All right, so let me reveal the correct answer first, and then I'll be introducing you guys to a new formula that you have to remember. All right, so Rosen says it's B, and B is in fact the correct answer, right? But why is that the case, right? So take a look at this. There's a small formula in ratios, right, which says if E is to B is equal to E small a is to small b, right? And B is to C equals to small b is to small c, right? This is capital C. And then C is to D equals to small e is to small f. Then E is to B is to C is to D happens to be ECE, right? E times C times E, or ECE in short. I'll be writing just EC because that'll be easier for you guys to remember. It'll be ECE is to BCE is to BDE, right? E is to BDF, right? So remember this particular formula because these types of questions are quite common in PRAGATII examination. So remember this formula, take a screenshot of this if you want, right? So remember this formula, just this, right? So now if we input 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 6, and 7 instead of A, B, C, D, E, and F, and in this particular formula, then we get that option number B is in fact the correct answer, right? And that's basically it, right? So this formula plays a key role in this particular question. So you guys must remember this to solve this question in proper terms, all right? As someone is pointing out in the chat box, this ratio should definitely be C is to D. That's on me. It should be C is to D. We are using unique numbers to represent each ratios. So thank you, Samjana, for that reminder. This should be C is to D. This is not B is to C because there's no guarantee that this ratio will have the same numerator as a denominator of the first one. So that's basically it. So take a screenshot of this once again, because that was a small bit of error I made. All right, so with this question done, we have completed ratio and proportion. Now we'll be quickly moving on to time, speed, and distance without any further ado, right? So in this particular section, there's only one formula that you guys need to sort of remember to do this section, and that is speed equals distance by time, or distance equals speed into time, or time equals, this is basically a formula for speed, or S, which is equal to d by t. And all three are basically different representations of the same formula, from which we can include, or we can at least bring about different values, right? So once you guys know this formula, I think this entire section becomes quite easy. You guys will have to know a bit of basic concepts such as finding the average speed or things of that sort. But once we get into the problems, I think those concepts will be quite clear as well. So let's directly move on to some practice problems. The first one, right? A man goes from Mumbai to Pune at the speed of 4 kilometers per hour, returns to Pune at speed of 6 kilometers per hour. What's his average speed of the entire journey, right? So in this case, what we'll be doing is take a look at this, right? So this is Mumbai, this is Pune, right? So the total distance that this man travels is, if the distance is d, then the total distance that he travels is td, total distance, which is short form for total distance, equals 2 times d, right? So 2d, right? And now what we have to find is the time, right? So time for this total distance. So for the first part, which is from going to from Mumbai to Pune, the time that he takes is the distance, right, by the speed, which is d by 4, right? And in the second phase, that is the returning phase, the time that he takes is d by 6, right? So with these done, we have the time for each phase of the travel, right? And we have the total distance. So average speed, right, is basically total distance by total time, which is 2d by d by 4 plus d by 6, which comes out to be 4.8 kilometers per hour. And our correct answer is option number A. Was this clear to everyone? All right, cool. So this is quite an easy problem, right? You guys will have to remember the formula for speed or average speed, which is simple, really simple, the same as that of speed, right? Distance by time, but total distance by total time. So with that said, let's move on to question number 2. All right, so I'm getting a few engagements in the chat. The correct answer to this as Samjana points out in the chat, is option number C, right? Which is 2250, right? Now, we know a few things from the problem, right? P cycles twice as fast as Q. So the speed of P is 2 times that of Q, right? And R cycles 1/3 as fast as Q. So the speed of R is 1/3 of that of Q, right? So from this particular statement, what we can also imply is that R takes 3 times more time than Q, right? Why? Because since the speed of R is 1/3 or 3 times less than Q, that must also mean that R takes 3 times more time than Q, right? Because lesser speed means that you travel for more time to cover the same distance, right? So from that inverse relation, what we can see is R takes, this is key, R takes 3 times more time than Q, right? And we know, right? So since R completes the race in 45 minutes, we can safely say that Q completes the Q. So time for Q to complete the race is 1/3 of 45, which is 15 minutes, right? Because R takes 3 times more time than Q. So it must mean that Q takes 3 times less time than R, right? So hopefully this concept is pretty clear to everyone, right? So with this, time Q equals 15 minutes, right? What we can also say is that since P cycles twice as fast as Q, it must mean that P completes the race in half the time that Q does. So time for P is equal to half of 15, which is 7.5 minutes, right? So now take a look at this, right? The question asks, where was Q? Where was Q from the finishing line when P finished the race, right? Now, since Q takes twice as much time as P does to finish the race, when P completes the 4,500 meters race, Q must be at the half point or at the midway. So Q will be at 4,500 by 2 meters from the finish line, which is 2,250, right? So this is the correct answer in this case. Is this clear to everyone? Yep, cool. So with this done, we'll be moving on to the next topic directly, right? Because all problems in the previous section was the same. Now we'll be taking a look at time and work, which people quite often find quite confusing. So these are a few formulae that you'll need to sort of complete this section. So take a screenshot of this and revise them in your free time, right? So with that done, let's quickly move on to some practice problems to give you guys a small taste of what these problems look like. So take a look at this. Raj can build a house alone in 16 days, right? So in one day, right, in this sort of problem, you guys directly have to find, or at least first have to find how much work is done in a day. In one day, Raj does 1/16 of work, right? Because in 16 days, he completes building the house. So in 1 day, he finishes 1/16 of the total work required to build the house, right? And Suraj alone can build the house in 12 days. So in 1 day, right, Suraj completes 1/12 of the work, right? 1/12 of the work. Now, Raj and Suraj work on alternate days. So if Raj works on first day, Suraj works on second day, and things of that sort. Now, the question mentions that Raj works on the first day, right? If Raj works on the first day, their house will be built in how many days, right? So take a look at this, right? Since they are working in alternating days, in 2 days, right? That is to mean when in first day Raj does 1/12, 1/16 of the work, and in second days Suraj does 1/12 of the work. In 2 days, the total work that they do, total work is equal to 1/16 plus 1/12, right? Which is 7/48, right? So this is a total amount of work that they are doing in 2 days, right? So now we will have to sort of multiply them by a factor which makes them less than or equal to 1, right? So take a look at this. 7 times 7 is 49, right? And 49 is greater than 48. So 7 is not the factor that we have to choose, because 1 is the total, 1 is the quantity that denotes the total amount of work. So the work that we do should not exceed 1, right? So let's say they take 6. So if we multiply this by 6, right, that directly implies that the total amount of time that we have used is 12 days, because 7/48 is the amount of work that is being done in 2 days. And if we multiply this by 6, we'll have to multiply 2 by 6 as well. So in 12 days, total work is 7 times 6, which is 42/48, right? 42/48, which is 7/8, right? So now I'll be writing it somewhere around here with a different colored pen, right? Remaining work after 7/8 work is finished, right, is 1/8, right? So from this, right, 1/8. Now the thing is, in the 13th day, right, after 12 days are over, in the 13th day, Raj is going to do his work. And we know that Raj completes 1/16 work in a day. So the remaining work after Raj does his work, right, is 1/8 minus 1/16, right, which is equal to 1/16, right? So even after the 13th day, we can clearly see that a few work is left. That is to say, 1/16 amount of work. So just by judging by this, and since 1/16 is a really less amount of work, we can directly say that the work is completed in 3/4 days, right? So we need not even calculate this, since we know that Suraj does 1/12 of work, which is clearly greater than 1/16, right? So just by judging by this, we can see that, right? So this is the correct answer in this particular case, right? No, the right answer is not 14. The right answer is 13 3/4. I mean, it's pretty obvious judging by this particular solution, right? If the work that had been left after 13 days was 1 by 12, then 14 would have been the correct answer. But since the amount of work that's left is only 1 by 16, which is less than 1 by 12, the correct answer is 13 3 by 4, right? So with this done, we'll be moving on to this problem. Take a look at this, right? A can complete a work in 12 days and B can complete the work in 8 days. A works for 8 hours every day while B works for 10 hours every day. If A and B start working together 8 hours per day, in how many days will they complete the work, right? So the total amount of time that A takes to complete the entire work is 12 times 8, right? Because A works 8 hours every day for 12 days. So that this is 96 hours, right? This is the total amount of time that A takes to complete the work, 96 hours. So in 1 hour, A completes 1 by 96 amount of work, right? So this is fairly simple. Now, doing the same thing for B, in 1 hour, B completes 1 by 80 amount of work, right? Because B works for 10 hours for, this is for A, this is for B, right? So if they work together, right, in 1 hour, they complete 1 by 96 plus 1 by 80, which is 11 by 480 amount of work, right? If they start working together, A and B, right? If they start working together, they finish 11 by 480 amount of work in an hour, right? So now, judging by this simply, to complete one work, they take, if we simply send 14 over 480 here and divide by 11 here, we can simply say that to complete one work, right? That is to say the total work, they require 480 by 11 hours, right? So this is fairly simple as well. So now if they work for 8 hours in a day, they will require this entire thing, which is in hours, divided by 8 hours, right? Divided by 8 hours, because since they are using 8 hours per day, right? So this will give us the number of days that they require, which is equal to 60 over 11, because 480 divided by 8 is 60. So this is the correct answer in days, right? They require 480 hours, 480 by 11 hours to complete the entire work. And since they work for 8 hours in a day, they'll require 480 over 11 whole divided by 8, right? Was this clear to everyone? All right, awesome. So with this done, we'll be moving on to the final problem for this session, which is this. All right. So in this question, what we'll be doing is we have to find the amount of time that B requires to do this work alone, right? So let's do this. Let B take MDs, right? Let B take MDs to complete this work alone, right? So in one day, B does 1 by M work, right? Since B will completely do the work in M days. Now, take a look at this. E takes twice as much time as B to do the work, right? So in one day, E does 1 by 2M amount of work, right? That which is the exact half of what B does. Since A takes twice as much time as B, so the amount of work that A does should be half of B as well, right? Now, we also know that in one day, E takes thrice as much time as C to finish the piece of work, right? So A will take So in this case, we can also say that A does 1. So what we can say in this case is that C, right? C will take E by 3, right? Which is equal to 2M by 3 days, right? This is because E takes thrice as much time as C takes to complete the work, right? So with that done, if they start working together, right? And this is the time that C takes to complete the entire work, all right? So keep that in your mind as well. Now, if they start working together, they will take the amount of work that they'll finish in a D is 1 by M, which is the amount of work done by B, plus 1 by 2M, right? Plus 3 by 2M, right? So we are also given that they can complete the work totally in 2 days. So in one day, they'll finish 1 by 2 amount of work. So this sum must be equal to 1 by 2, right? Since they finish the entire work in 2 days, in one day, they must finish half the work. So the entire sum equals to this. And when we solve this final equation, what we get is M is equal to 6 days, which is the correct answer in this case, right? So option number D is the correct answer, right? Was this clear to everyone? All right, great. So with this done, we have come to the end of our discussion, right?